Welcome to Forgiven, a podcast where we seek to empower and inspire all believers to live an authentic Christian life. In today's episode, we're discussing how to share the gospel in a post-Christian world.
And welcome everyone to Forgiven. We are glad that you are here. I know that there have been a number of people who've been listening over the last few weeks, and we are glad that you're listening in. We're trying to do the best that we can just to create conversations online. And really, our audience is for any person who is interested in faith. And hopefully it is for those of you who are kind of at the beginning stages, or maybe you are just trying to figure this faith thing out and you're listening in on certain things, asking questions that perhaps you have asked and have never been answered because you're only in church for a little while, or there's just a number of different reasons. Again, the reason we want to have this podcast is because we want to move you along incrementally. If you're a 10 out of 100 in your walk, you're just starting out, we don't want to bring you to 100. We want to bring you to a 11 or a 12. And many times that's how God works in our lives. And so we've been reaching out on a number of subjects, and I'm kind of here. For those of you who don't know, I'm Mike Gordon. I'm the pastor at Bethel Brandon. I have my sidekick here, Logan. How you doing, Logan?
I'm great, sir. How are you?
Excellent. We have a guest that we are so happy to have. We have Louis. Now, I'm always trying to get your last name straight. It's Hogblock?
Halbgewachs.
Halbgewachs. Okay, I'm going to have to write
that was pretty
down.
good.
Halbgewachs. And we are happy to have him because we're talking about thriving in what we call the post-Christian era, and things have changed drastically. And as we were discussing things earlier, the thought is that there was kind of a bit of a turn that had happened, and many people who are church growth analysts have talked about a time that was at the end of the 60s during the World Fair, which the emphasis was man and his world, and there was this kind of shift in the change. We kind of had this little biblical Christian foundation that was kind of popular, and society rode on, despite whether you went to church or not. And that has drastically changed, particularly as we have advanced in social media and just advancement of knowledge, and so the message of the gospel still remains the same. And we're at a point now where we're asking ourselves, how do we become effective in this? I hate to say new world, because we kind of have been existing in this for a long time. And we're glad to have you on, Louis, because you're kind of an expert. You're kind of a church coach. You are a revitalization expert. That's kind of what you do. You travel to churches throughout Manitoba and Saskatchewan, right?
That is what I am presently doing for the last couple of years.
Okay. You want to just kind of give us a brief update as to how that's working for you?
Absolutely. So my primary role is church coach and vitalization catalyst, and my purpose is to engage local churches, pastors, and boards, help them to take a snapshot look of where they're at, and then try to put together a plan on how we can move into a preferred future. So there's a lot of churches that know kind of they're not where they would like to be, and not feeling like they're having the impact on the culture, the community they're in, to the level that they know that God even wants them to have. And so my role is I come in and I work with the local leaders to take a look at where things are at, find out areas that are healthy and celebrate those, and then find out areas that are just either hindering health, growth, and vitality, or in some cases even just sick, and that need to be changed. And then we journey together to help bring those into a healthy place. So that's kind of a snapshot.
And you have worked with Logan.
I was going to say, having been on the receiving end of your church coaching revitalization, it's great.
Yeah.
It actually is really great. So
Thanks, Logan.
And of course, we've had conversations, because that's where my heart lies. That's where all of our hearts lie. And I wouldn't be venturing out too far to say that every single church that believes in the truth of the gospel is struggling with this issue. And sometimes there's this tug between the fact that this is the way we have actually reached people before, and we're kind of figuring that's not working. And there's this new, I don't know what I would call it a new, but there's just as our society has changed, we have come to realize that we need to somehow change. And so the questions that we're wanting to ask ourselves today is, well, how do I change? how do I actually reach people? We did a podcast recently on first generation Christians, and you and I are first generation Christians. And I have observed as the pastor that as people come to know the Lord, that many of them are people who at one time had faith and they grew up in a church, or they were Christian for a little while and they had left and now are coming back. And as I have observed and as I've sought to reach out people, that's great that they are, but nobody is reaching people like me who did grow up in a church. As a matter of fact, it just seems like those people who are like me are not even on the playing field in terms of conversations about Christianity. And so that has, there's a personal aspect to me as I'm reading it and as I'm looking at how do I genuinely reach people. And so let me just start out with that. So as we start with the conversation is, how do I, in today's world, genuinely reach people?
Okay, I'm gonna start with a little kind of plug that ties in with vitalization, but it can kind of go across the board.
Okay.
Is one of my lines is that you're just blind to what you're blind to. And every church, no matter where you're at, it's good to get an outside set of eyes. Personally, as a father, husband, follower of Christ, I am better because I have people who I've given permission to speak into my life and point out areas where I'm obviously blind to. And a lot of our churches are filled with really good-willed people, but we're just stuck doing it the way we've always done it without ever really thinking through, why do we do it like this? Do we do it like this because it's the way it's always been done? Do we do it like this because we're just sentimental? Or do we do it like this because it's actually commanded in Scripture? So getting that outside set of eyes is always helpful. And I love the fact that you guys are first-generation Christians, because so am I. And really one of the things that caused me to have real success and health in early ministry is that I didn't know that we couldn't do it like this. Because I came in with a brand new, fresh set of eyes, and I just did what seemed like it made sense. And when people looked quizzical at me and said, well, that's not, we can't do it like that. We're Pentecostal, or we can't do it like that. It's never been done like that. I'd ask why. And then they would look at me with a quizzical look going, because they didn't know why. They just never had thought about it in a different sense. So that's just kind of an overarching kind of thought.
Yeah.
My second response, I guess, where we're at, we were talking a little bit before about this. As the culture, historically, the table of the culture has kind of been tilted towards us. So naturally, people would kind of roll towards faith or Christian morality. And the culture has shifted, and the table is now tilted away from us. And so we need to rethink and relook at how we do things. And so the statement that I would use is that years gone by, people would believe and then belong. And today, it's a lot more about people belonging and then believing. And what that means is maybe 30 years ago, people would have this conversion moment and they would say, okay, I believe. And then they would try to figure out how to fit themselves in to how they could belong in a local assembly. And today, it seems to kind of flipped on its head, and it's much more the other way. People want to know that we care about them, that we love them, that we're willing to journey with them. And once they realize that they belong, they're like, okay, I'm in, I believe. And the neat thing about that is that they've even experienced a bit of discipleship as we've been journeying with them. So when they come to that point of saying, yes, I'm in, I'm going to follow Jesus, they're not starting at ground zero. They've actually been getting discipled throughout that whole process before they kind of make that a formal, yes, I'm in kind of thing. So does that make sense? Is that anybody your guys' experience?
That certainly has been experienced.
That was
say something?
So that was exactly sort of my coming to Christ moment. Was I had my family friends, they made me belong first, right? Growing up in just my mom, you're always looking for family and things to do, and they made me feel like I was part of their family first. Then eventually it was slowly, they went to church, so I went to church, and then it was through that I met some really good people who made me belong first. They hung out with me, all these amazing youth leaders, and then through that discipleship was built. And then after that, it was, I believe in what I'm doing. I believe in this cause or message, the church and everything. So I've experienced that firsthand, and it is like, I think it's just the way we should be doing it, right? And we see that now with culture changing. That's what people want from us. So
yeah, I know I had a conversation with somebody, and they were remarking on the fact that it is so hard to reach people, that people are so adverse to the gospel and as I kind of pondered that, I come to the realization that people are just as hungry for spiritual things. Mm-hmm. They're just as desiring to see something of real, genuine truth in their lives. It's just that the manner of which we have gone about it has not really caught with the chemistry of who they are. And I think that it certainly is that whole aspect of believing as opposed to belonging. That is a hard sell for the people who have kind of been in the way or have been kind of used to a traditional form of Christianity. Because the thought is we have been hardline evangelicals. We have been, you have to ask Jesus in, and until that happens, then you are in no place you're in no place to kind of be part of the fellowship, and that certainly has to change. That certainly has to be something that we have to take a look at. And I have found that the difference in reaching people, like genuinely reaching people. I hate to use the term evangelism now because there's certain connotation to it.
It's a bad word.
And it seems like me tricking or trying to connive person to make a decision to serve Jesus. That's not what it is. To actually get to a point where I genuinely care so that they hear a message and receive the hope that comes with it. And I've come to a point where I realize that this whole hit and run message of the gospel just doesn't work. It takes time to do it because it just takes time to build trust. And as I didn't grow up in a religious home, one of the first things that comes to me, and maybe you can comment on this, or you too, Logan, is whenever you do an activity or some type of a program, the first thing that people are thinking is, okay, what's the catch? Where's the sermon? Are you going to give me a track? Have you experienced anything along that line? And how do we combat that?
Yes. Doing life with people. So getting to know them in their setting, I think is how we combat it instead of being the first contact. So the story I kind of talk about is we're all familiar with most of us are familiar with the little diagram of the chasm where you've got somebody on one side of the chasm, and that's death and sin and eternal death. And then there's this impossible chasm to cross. On the other side is God and eternal life. And the only way to cross the chasm is through the cross of Christ. And we've got this picture, and I drew one on PowerPoint, this little stick man on the one side. He's right on the edge of the chasm. And historically, we'd sit on our side with God and eternal life, and we would just kind of shout niceties and platitudes and shout some of this type of evangelism. And enough people would be at that very cusp, that edge, that they would kind of hear us from our other side where we're living in some level of comfort, and they would be willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to try and willing to take a leap of faith. And that worked a number of decades ago. The struggle we're in today in this post-Christian culture is that almost nobody is standing at the edge of the chasm day in and day out. Like I would guess you could survey 100 of your closest neighbors and that don't attend church, and I would almost guess that none of them are sitting at the edge of that chasm wondering, should I make a commitment to Jesus or shouldn't I? Should I or shouldn't I? They're now like 20, 30 miles back. They're nowhere near that chasm, going about life and struggling through life in 2022. They're wondering, how do I raise kids in a world that is covered in social media, where even people who don't have a faith background can look at what's on and think there's craziness that my kids are being exposed to? How do I deal with finances as inflation continues to rise and we didn't have enough money before? And even the idea of adulting, right? That has become a new term since I've become an adult. But like people just don't know how to do, and they're concerned with what's affecting them day in and day out. And if we're simply sitting on our comfy side of the chasm and just yelling at them to come follow Jesus, they either don't hear us because they're so far away from that edge, or if they do hear us, they hear some mumbling in the background. They just think there's crazy people way off in the distance screaming at them. So I think how we combat what you were saying, Pastor, is that we need to actually get ourselves out of our comfortable space, walk over, because we know we have crossed that chasm. We've stumbled over the cross, and we know that Christ holds us, and we're okay. We need to take our lives and we need to go into the muck and mire, and we need to travel to where they're at, engage them where they are at, and engage them just because we love them and they were created in the image and likeness of God. Because God loves them. Christ died for them where they're at, so far away from that point of whether they're going to come into the family. Engage them there. And there's lots of young people are dying for grandparent figures. People don't know how to cook basic necessities out of raw ingredients. Like, there's all sorts of real practical ways to engage people where they're at, struggling with finances, debt, kids, parenting, online stuff. Engage them where they're at. Just take a real interest and then start a relational journey with them. It's more effort on our part, but we start that relational journey with them. So then when we do get to that point, the edge of the chasm where they have to stumble over the cross of Christ, it's not just, oh, you're going to stick me with some track and you have no concern. Because I think there's a feeling that if that's all we do, people start to think like we just want to use them as a commodity to get ourselves a little check mark that we've accomplished something by giving you or getting you here. Where if we journey with them up to that point, they get to know who we really are. They get to see that we authentically love them just because of who they are, created by God, and that we want to take a real interest in them. And we're really friends with them up until that point. Now, they still have to stumble over the cross. It's not watering anything down, but it's just being truly engaging and loving with people where they're at and then beginning that journey with them instead of just sitting on our comfy side kind of yelling platitudes across a chasm at them. I think that's how I answer. Does that make sense to you guys?
That absolutely resonates with me. Did you want to add anything to that, Logan?
I would just say that in my experience, being a new Christian and everything, that was absolutely how I that's how I'm still here, was because I had people reach it. Like, I'll be honest, I didn't know how, I didn't have a dad, so I didn't know how to do 90% of the things that a typical teenage boy should know how to do. Right? I didn't know how to change a tire. I didn't know how to do any of that. But you best bet I had youth leaders and friends and other people, Christians, step up, show me how to do that, and teach me those basic life skills that Pastor Leo was going on about. And so that is really, really important. And I think one other thing too to add is that the chasm is also just it's just way longer now because there's so much more history on our side, on the church side now, than there was before because of social media and of these all these amazing movements that have come out that are good, keeping us accountable and everything. But now there is so much more road for new people to have to get through to even get to us, right? The church has a lot of baggage now.
We've created a mountain in front of the chasm.
Yes. Exactly.
So when I talk about this in churches, my third little diagram. So I have one diagram with the stick figure standing on the edge of the chasm. I have a second stick figure showing that the guy is now 20 miles back, so he's way far. And then I've got a third one that I put a mountain in between where he is 20 miles back and the actual edge of the chasm. And in too many cases, we've created barriers that make it so people have to do this incredible climb to get to the edge of the chasm. And I think that's the other thing in this. One of the things I've always been about, and in this, is removing barriers, hindrances, walls that deter people from coming to Christ and His bride, the church.
So what barriers would you say we were talking about?
I think if we're gonna go with a young person's perspective, church songs. I'm gonna be real. Music is a big barrier for entry for people in the church now, because people are going to come and they're going to listen to songs and they're not going to understand the meaning. They're not going to understand what's going on. Worship is one of the most awkward experiences ever if you've never done it before.
I would have never thought of that. Be quite honest with you, I would have never been a thing that would hit my radar even.
But I remember being in youth group the very first time, big band, lights and everything like that, and I'm standing there just what do I do? I don't know the words. I can see them, but I don't know how to sing. It's awkward. And then they're talking about, they were singing the song Oceans, which is a great song. I love it now that I understand the significance of it. But when you're singing that to somebody who has no idea what it's about, it doesn't reach me. And I think that's part of that mountain. That's part of that culture we've built up in the church of like, we get so used to doing things like our way and all that, and it just keeps adding to the mountain. So that's,
As I look at it, I think that there are like 2 or 3 mountains or barriers even before they even get into church.
exactly.
That's kind of where I'm asking questions. Are you have any barriers that you can kind of think of?
We call it a stained glass barrier. Like there is this barrier at the entrance of the church doors that I've had so many conversations with people who we've engaged with, journeyed with, and they finally decide they're going to come to church, and they get in front of the building and they're still white knuckling their steering wheel because they can't figure out how to get themselves in. So in a relational aspect, one of the things that I talk with people is as you've journeyed with people and as you invite people to the point, now there's even a lot of barriers prior to this, but as you invite people to come to faith, or not come to faith, when you invite people to come out to church for the first time, here's what I do. Normally what we do is like we invite somebody to church, tell them what time it is, tell them where it is, and say, okay, and they say, yeah, okay. And then, all right, great. And then we show up at church on Sunday, we get visiting with our previously church friends, we get busy because something happened and we need to run around and check the sound or do something. And if our friend shows up, they enter into a new building for the first time. They even if they finally break through that stained glass barrier and they enter in and they don't know anybody, they don't know what the building looks like, they don't know where they're supposed to go, and they see people talking all around them, but nobody's engaging them, and they feel more lonely than ever as they've entered. So what I've been telling people to do is this, is as you journey with people and at the point where you kind of invite them, say, you know what, we're doing something at our church, would love to have you, would you be interested? And if somebody says yes, then I kind of coach and train people in this. So here's what I'm going to tell you to do. If you invite somebody out and they say they're going to come, you say, okay, here's the plan. I'm going to journey with you through this entire process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually wait in the parking lot till you show up. So you don't have to worry about entering the building by yourself. I'm going to be in the parking lot. I'll wait for you. We'll meet out there. I'll walk in with you. I'll show you the lay of the land. I'll explain everything that's going on, and I'll journey with you from the first step all the way through to the last. So you don't have to feel awkward. I'll be with you the whole way. Now but understand, I'm going to be hanging out in the parking lot. So if you can't make it, that's fine, but you've got my number. Let me know ahead of time. But otherwise, I'm waiting in the parking lot till you show up because I'm not going in without you because you're my friend.
Nice.
And I want to journey with you through this. And that just removes so many barriers that we don't even think about half the time, right? We just think, well, I'll invite you out to church and you should come in and everybody's welcoming and everybody's happy. But you don't realize how many steps of they had to struggle through to get to the parking lot and to then get through the front door. And then now they're in the door and they're looking around. They can't see anybody. They don't see you. You're busy. You just remove so many barriers, and even it removes the barrier from people who drive up to the church, white knuckling and drive away. Because if you see them driving up to the church, and they know that you're waiting in the parking lot, once they're in that, you engage them, you walk with, you can be, I get it. It's nervous. I've been there. I've walked through this, but for you, first time, I want you to know this doesn't need to be a nervous experience. I'm with you the whole way. And it takes down all those extra barriers. They have a much better first experience because they've not had to feel awkward at any moment because their friend, who you've already journeyed with them up to this point, has met them before they had to go through that stained glass barrier. And so that's one of the things, kind of tying in a little bit with Logan and the idea of music, and I won't rant on that just yet. But, actually, I'll do a little rant and I'll back up.
Okay.
Days of Elijah, I love it. You need a doctorate in Old Testament theology to know what on earth is going on.
Exactly.
I do. I love the song, but when somebody for the first time, and then the dry bones becoming his flesh, we've got the zombie apocalypse going on. Anyways, it's But with that being said, I'm going to back up and talk about language in general. Often, we send missionaries overseas to foreign lands, and usually the first thing we do is we send them for language training, because they need to learn to speak the language of the locals in order to properly present the gospel, love, engage with people, and journey with them. Yep. I think in Canada in 2022 in our churches, we need to put our church people through language training. We need to start to get the mentality that we are missionaries. We are now living not in a Christian culture, as we're talking about. We're living in a post-Christian culture. Yep. We need to start looking at life through the lens of a missionary, going in and living amongst people, learning the language of the natives, so that we can actually share with them in meaningful ways and engage with them in meaningful ways. Because one of those other barriers, whether it's in-house or out, is how we speak to people. So we can actually express the fullness of the gospel without watering anything down in language that the people that we've been placed with an arm's reach of can understand. But too often we've got so much Christianese, so much of our own language that people like most of our great words, nobody uses in regular conversation, right? And you can explain them in common English because when they were first written in Greek, they were written in common Greek. Yeah. We've just added extra religious connotations to them, right? Yep. So that even that, so that idea of journeying, but there's a lot of little thoughts if we think through the process that can just remove a lot of those barriers.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I think all of us kind of have a rant inside of us when it comes to this subject, isn't it?
Yep.
Like a couple.
I know for myself, as I've just observed and talked with people, I've come to realize that a person that is not part of the Christian world, I can't speak for all of them, but I find that there's enough to say that there's a consensus of people who think that as the church, we really don't care about them whatsoever. Mm-hmm. There is, why would I come to this? Because ultimately you have shown me that you really don't care about me. You kind of have this agenda, this little religious agenda, and there's certain attachments to it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you really don't care about me at all. And that has been perhaps the impetus in me to cause me to change and say, listen, what I want to do is I want to convince you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are loved and cared for me, even if you never, ever come to faith. So if all of a sudden you reject that and say, listen, I'm going to tell you right off the start that I'm never, ever going to join your church. I'm never, ever going to be a part of what you are doing. I'm at the point now where I say, I don't care about that. What I want you to know is that the mandate of my faith is that I love you no matter what. That becomes the end all and be all. So if you have an activity and you say, listen, come join us in this. Well, it doesn't mean I'm going to be a Christian. Well, that's no problem. It means I'm a Muslim. I'm going to be a Muslim the rest of my life. That's okay. The ultimate thing for me, for you to know, is that I care for you, and that you walk away and say, I don't believe him. He might be crazy. He's got weird thoughts or whatever I don't agree with. But one thing I know for sure is that he is actually doing something to genuinely show me that he cares. And I've come to realize that those are the first steps. And if you don't have those steps in place, then it's going to be very hard. It's going to be very hard to win people past that first base. Would I don't know. That's part of my rant. Is there anything you can add to that, or is there anything in your experience you've seen that's?
Well, I'll just add to that a little bit.
Okay.
So as now, our group, Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, sometimes when I go places, I talk about the Constitution, which is just thrilling, riveting. Everybody just
yes.
But the second line in the General Constitution under our core values says that we as people of our fellowship, we value people without Christ, and we owe them the compassion of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that because we're so we actually value people who don't yet know Jesus, and we owe them something. It's not on them, it's on us. We actually owe them the compassion of Christ. That's core to who we are, and I think we kind of sometimes forget about that. And too often we have used people just as like pawns to kind of get the checkbox.
Yeah.
Right. We care about you, whether you ever come to faith or not. I mean, I pray and hope that you come to faith, and I believe without faith, it's an eternal. It's not good.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not here just to check that box off. I'm here because God loves you, and He's commissioned me to love you. Right. So I agree with you, Pastor Mike.
Yeah. That becomes the thing that is important. That's kind of why we say as a church, we want to be a church in our community for our community. That kind of is the basis for it. I know as we were kind of doing a play with words when I was first here as the pastor, I realized that Bethel has the word be the with the word L, and that's kind of why we started, be the life, be the light, be the love, be the link. So we incorporated them with the thought that that's what we want to do. We want to actually tangibly show the love of Christ to people, and I believe that when we do that, that is where the Holy Spirit creates the opportunity for us to interject some truth into their life.
And well, biblically, I mean, this is what Jesus did. Like, yeah, he preached to hundreds of thousands of people probably over his time, but first thing he did was he went and found 12 miscreants and was like, hey, I'm going to hang out with you. I'm going to be your friend. And we're going to start there. Like that's what, like, so why, like, sometimes I just get so, like, I look at that and even in my own life and I'm like, why am I trying to change it? Jesus already modeled what we're supposed to be doing. Like, it's like, just go and be friends with people. Why do we have to have this transactional idea that, like, I do something for you, so now you have to do something for me? You know, like, it's just like one of those things that, like, it just rubs me the wrong way. Like, I have so many friends who are not Christian, and they've outright told me, like you said, I'm never going to be. And you know what? And they were expecting me to get mad, upset, whatever. And I'm like, that's fine. I still love you anyway. I was like, we're still going to hang out. I'm still going to be your friend. I was like, just because I have this choice in my life doesn't counteract that we're still friends and I care about you. I was like, that's not going to change regardless. And you know what? It was a slow change, but some of them are actually, like, went to youth group with me. Some of them gave their lives to Christ because we just hung out. And it was like Wednesday night, oh, Logan can't hang out. He's going to youth. And I was like, slowly but surely, they were like, you know what? Maybe I'll come. I want to hang out with Logan. He's fun. And it's just a slow sort of erosion, so to speak. And it just, like, worked.
I didn't realize you're that much of a fun guy.
Apparently. But yeah.
In our ministry, we've seen so many people who are actually hostile to the gospel coming to faith. Now, we could have said, well, you're hostile to the gospel, so I'm just going to write you off, and I'm not going to engage you. I'm not going to love you. It's not worth my time and energy. But it's amazing. I know God just so shocked me one time because there was a chief of police in Carlisle who was absolutely opposed to the gospel. And we had so many volunteer firefighters who came to faith and started attending our church. And one Sunday morning, we finished Sunday morning prayer, and I looked up down this hallway, and the chief walked in, and me and my lack of faith, my first thought was, oh no, what's he doing here? And I was thinking, I bet you something went down with the phone lines. And he's come to take all the volunteer firefighter out to do something. And it just, because he was so hostile, but we continued to love it. But at first, and then all of a sudden I went up and engaged him, and I found out, no, he was broken and hurting. And even though he was radically hostile to the gospel, because the guys in the firefighting department and the rest of us just continued to journey and love and not write him off, all of a sudden, when things went on in life, the first place he turned, he walks through the church doors, eventually comes to faith. I got to do his wedding, married, disciple him, passionate follower of Jesus, right? Nice. But at first, and a number of stories like that, but at first, my humanness even took over when I seen him enter the door. Wasn't like, oh, finally. It was like, but there's that idea because we didn't write him off. And you could have so easily, because he was very antagonistic. And so in my humanness in earlier conversations, it'd be much easier to say, you know what, I'm not engaged with you because you're rude to me. Well, who cares if they're rude to me? Yeah. Like, they were rude to Christ. They were a little more than rude to Christ, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Stay engaged, and whatever God does, my job is to continue to follow Jesus and love the people that he died for. His job is to work on convicting and drawing them, right?
That's the power. That's where the power of the gospel is.
Amen.
You know, even now as we're talking, I don't know who's listening in. And you might be feeling the same way. You're kind of at that crossroads in your walk, and you're just trying to figure this whole thing out. And I think the important thing is to continue the conversation with people who believe in Christ, who genuinely care about you. That's where you really begin to see change take place. I had this thought, and just in conversation with different people. The statistic was a number of years ago that, people who came to know Jesus, 3% came as a result of an evangelist. And, this person, because they watched 100 Huntley Street or PTL Club at that time.
Right.
And like very small percentage. And it got to the point where 90% of people came to know Jesus because a close associate of them lived out the faith and talked with them. started the conversation. That was the statistic 40 years ago. And I've come to realize that statistic hasn't changed.
Yeah.
It is the same way that we reach people. The reason that we're having problems reaching people is because I believe the Christians have walked away from the table. They're not having conversations. They don't even have friends that are not Christians, and we've kind of alienated them. And as a result, people have walked away and tried to look for something else, based on the fact that there is that kind of that distance that is there, and no one is just having the critical conversations with people about faith.
One of the greatest examples that I have seen of this idea, because it almost goes to like Christian character, right? And it's like, I think people are really good at sniffing out fake Christians. It's like, you're really good. I call them holiday Christians. They go on Easter, Christmas, and maybe Thanksgiving, whatever. They fake it for the family kind of thing. But if you don't know, there's like the Robertson family. They're the big, like, evangelistic, like, Christians from Duck Dynasty and everything. And they had their show, 10 seasons. And they had a sound guy on that show. So he mics everybody up. He hears every single thing that they talk about, whether they're on camera or not, because their mics are still on. And he's done hundreds of reality TV shows and everything. And he's so calloused to this idea of like fakeness, right? Because he's doing all these reality shows. And he said to Phil, he's a patriarchy of the family. He was like, don't even try to change me. It's not going to happen. Like, I know you guys are Christians. Don't even talk to me about it. Very much like your chief of police and everything. And they didn't try to change him at all. They just actively lived their normal life and talked and prayed. And he's sitting there listening to every single thing that they're talking about. And I think by like the 4th season or something, he had given his life to Christ. They baptized him. And all this stuff, and they didn't actively go out and share the message with him. They didn't, hand him a Bible and all this. It was just, they just lived their lives.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think if so many more Christians just did it that way and actively, authentically chase that like good Christian character, at church and at home, I think we would see a huge return from that. And I think that's where the battle comes in as Christians. It's very easy to be a Christian for 2 hours on a Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. But the real battle is doing it at home and throughout the week. That's why in youth and children's ministry, they say 90% of that ministry is won or lost in the home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
there's a great book that came out. Oh, it's been a few years now, but it was by Rosaria Butterfield. I don't know if you had heard it. It's called The Gospel Comes with a House Key.
Oh, I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with it.
She's such an articulate, and her conversion story is incredible. And how she was a tenured professor in Syracuse University and very much against the gospel, was actually doing a study against it. And there was this couple that kind of sat down with them, and he says, we didn't even talk about church for 2 years. They just had me at the home, and they began to talk and just start a conversation. She said the church wasn't even part of the conversation for a couple of years. And she talks about the fact that the best way that we actually genuinely reach people is to practice hospitality. Just have your neighbor over for a barbecue. Conversation doesn't really have to go to you ramrod a conversation about church into the conversation because you feel that you need to be faithful, and the Bible tells us that we need to be faithful. And I think the first command is such an important one. You have to love Jesus with all your heart. And the same is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the foundation prints for it. And I think she said, you know what? If the soles of the feet of your people getting your house dirty are more important than the souls that they have in terms of who they are, then there's a problem. But I think that's so true. And I think that God is working in my heart. I can't speak for anyone else, but I get to a point where I just want to let people know that I actually genuinely care for them. And from there, I don't know, I hand the baton off to the Holy Spirit. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, because I think God is in the whole process. Someone once said that evangelism is joining a conversation that the Holy Spirit is already having with someone. I believe that is true. And even as we have people listening and God is speaking to their hearts, this is part of the conversation that the Holy Spirit used. I'm trying to figure out a way as the pastor that we actually do that as a church, that we actually come to a point where we can, through whatever activities, whatever programs, whatever efforts we make, we can at least say, I don't believe anything that they say, but I genuinely think that they care for me. And I think that we can make headways. The problem is, it takes a long time for people to build that trust.
Well, it takes a big investment, not like money wise, but it actually takes an entire like church to actually get behind that investment, to understand that like you're probably not gonna see a return from this. Like not to talk like businessy, but you're not gonna get a return on your investment when you do like. Mm-hmm. Like I think so many times we have this idea that we're gonna throw this big free party, and then 5 people are gonna show up to church the next Sunday, and oh, that's worth it because 5 people came in the church door. And I was like, no, we need to change the whole mentality and be like, no, we actually just blessed a community of people.
You just don't see the investment, or you don't see the payback.
Exactly. Right. We just have to. I think honestly, and this is something I struggled with for a really long time. I hate the parable of the sower. I hated it growing up because I was like, I don't want to just be the seed planter because it's not fulfilling. I don't want to just walk around and scatter the seed because you never know how it ends up.
You want to be the harvest dude.
I always wanted to be the harvester, and it was such a. I still wrestle with it sometimes, but I'm like, I think we sometimes just need, as Christians, need to understand that like it's okay to just plant the seed and walk away. Yeah. You know, I don't know.
At some point, I'm going to push back a little bit on the plant the seed and walk away, but I want to touch base. No, that's good. I want to touch base on something else here. I'm trying to get my thoughts about me. One of the things I think Christians struggle with, and sometimes especially pastors, but it can be the entire congregation, is we think we have to bring quote unquote correction or truth into every conversation we have. Yeah. So if somebody says something that's wrong, instead of just listening to their story and getting to know them and journeying with them, we think as the arbiters of truth, we have to like bop them on the head and give them the truth and tell them, well, actually, that's wrong. So I think every member of the church, every member of every church has an active ministry to the people that God has placed us within arm's reach of today. And it can be, and a lot of what I'm encouraging churches with is very relational stuff. Now, the pushback on the plant the seed and walk the way is I think we need to think through how we journey with people from point A to point B to point C to point D, okay? But in that journey, it's not all just Bible study, Bible study, Bible study, Bible study. So Gen Z, the statistics tell us that Gen Z are dying for relationship with grandparents. They love grandparents. Yes. You know what a lot of churches have?
Grandparents.
Lots of grandparents, old people.
Yes.
Now, we have to be able to train our seniors and encourage them not to just be find the sin of the young generation detestable upon first encounter. But you've got to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to find a way to engage with young people and listen to them without agreeing with them, without saying what they're doing is right, what they're struggling with, but just hear them out, let them talk and journey with them. And so we got young people who are struggling with gender dysphoria and sexuality and all these things that coming out of a holiness, purity movement, we find just detestable and we don't want to have anything to do with. But somewhere as a senior in the church, could we find the maturity? You know what? We're going to invite a half dozen teenagers over, and Grandma Betty is going to teach them how to make her world famous cinnamon buns, because these kids have not had a real piece of home baked food maybe in their lives. And we're gonna spend 4 weeks. We're gonna teach them how to do it. We're gonna send them home every week with a dozen cinnamon buns, and you know what? Other than them realizing that Grandma Betty is because Grandma Betty is a Christian, she's just going to journey with them, love them, and she's going to start a relationship with them. And when they talk about the fact that they're struggling with whether they're polyamorous or bisexual or whatever, you're not at first instance just going to come and bop them on the head and be aghast and tell them how sinful it is. You're going to say, oh, well, that's not the way it was in my generation, and share your story, but not just continually immediately. Non-Christians don't want someone, none of us don't want somebody on a first instinct just to tell us that we're wrong, even if we are.
Yeah.
Right? Like even if we are, but okay, well that's interesting. That's different than my generation. So what else is going on in your life, right? And just starting those initial, that's where that planting that seed, right? Yeah. That initial planting that seed of relational connectedness. But then after those 4 weeks or after you're done your cinnamon bun thing, not just dropping them and not talking to them for 4 months until you decide you're going to run a cake baking thing. No, but you're actually then going to continue to stay engaged. And that's where my pushback is just a little bit, Logan, right? I think too often we hold one event in the fall, we invite out people, we got a bunch of people to show up for our kickoff, we don't get any information, we don't do any follow-up, we don't talk to them again until Christmas. At Christmas, we do this big Christmas production. We invite and we tell everybody, we're so thankful you're here. You're in the right place. We're so thankful you're here. We're so excited. But then we don't invite them to anything else. We don't recontact them until Easter. And it kind of feels like, because when we need to understand that when non-Christians come for the first time, they've already taken a huge leap of faith just by showing up. And now they're saying, I'm here. Do you guys actually want me? Do I really belong? And if we just scatter that one off and then don't talk to them for 4 months, we're actually, I keep stealing this business term, we do this anti-marketing. We're telling them we want them publicly, and then you don't talk to them for 4 months. Yeah. If you were in a friendship or relationship, often when I'm doing a conference, I'll ask all the guys who are married, I'll say, all of the married men, when you were on the first date with your present spouse, when were you planning the second date? And almost unanimously, everybody says either on the first date or before the first date. Like everybody was really on the ball for date number 2. And then I'll ask the wives, I said, all right, if your present husband took you out on a first date, things were going well, and then he didn't talk to you, he didn't call you, contact you, talk to you for 4 to 6 months, would have there been a second date? And almost unanimously, every woman in the house goes, no way, right? But so often that's what we're doing with non-Christians. Yeah. We invite them to one thing, we tell them that they're valued, and then we don't talk to them forever. So how do you kind of set the stage where you're doing these steps, right? We call it bridge building. And not everything has to be Bible study, but how do you do a relational moment? And then after that relational moment's done, how do you continue to say, you know what? You've been in my house for 4 weeks doing cinnamon buns. I want to come have you over for this and just continue that journey. Does that make sense to you guys?
That certainly hits a nerve. I would imagine someone who's listening that really hits at a deep level. And I think it is the process. It is the process of us learning. Really, it really is. And I know I'm at that point. I haven't really arrived. You know, I always take all these things and I'm always continually learning. Like, what is the best way I can be a better pastor or a better Christian? Sometimes I think I got to be a better Christian. I'm trying to be a better pastor, and there's other things that are more important than that sort of thing. Now, I got 2 things I wanted to try and get before we end this podcast. Yep. You made a comment. And I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was just you and I talking, or I was listening to you speak one time. And it was something to the effect that you know that you are doing the right thing when your greatest evangelists are the unsaved people or the non-church people that come to your church. Can you kind of expound a little bit on that statement that I've known that you've made a few times?
Yeah, I have made. I talk about making non-Christians evangelists. Basically, I think our churches, so as individuals and corporately, we are the temple of the Spirit of God on earth. And that should be such a blessing to our local community that people who don't even attend our church would start sending people to our church who are hurting, in need. And my experience from pastoring in southeastern Saskatchewan is through the events that we did. Like, we always ask the question, where's there an itch in our community and how can we scratch that itch? And then we tried to be a tangible blessing to our community. And I had so many conversations with people who would say to me, well, Louis, I don't attend church, but if I attended church, I would attend one like this because you guys care about the community and you add value to the community. And I don't know if they use the word blessing, but essentially they kept saying, you're such a blessing to our community. And then what we would find is that new people we always had new people coming through the doors, and we'd engage them, visiting, first time, and new to the community. And they'd be like, oh, no, like Heathen Hal from the car dealership? Yeah, like Heathen Hal sent me here. Yeah. And I was like, what? And
Ethan Howell's never come to this church himself.
or ever, like
Yes.
ever, right? But at the same time, Ethan Howell, he's like, he knew that we helped people who were struggling, that we were a blessing. If somebody knew the community and they were trying to figure out where they could fit in, he knew that there was a fun, healthy place where new families could fit in. And so I don't even know how many times we would talk with people, and we tried to create an invitational culture within our church, but we apparently created an invitational culture within the non-Christians who don't attend our church, because we were able to be such a force of good and blessing in our community that non-Christians would send their non-Christian friends to our church.
That's
so
great.
that's how I talk about that. What would it take for your church to be such a force of good, such a blessing to your community, that non-Christians would become evangelists and start sending their non-Christian friends, coworkers, relatives to your church because they knew your church was a place where they could fit in, they would belong, they would find help, healing, hope. So what would it take? What would it take for the local church to be that type of a force of good, that type of a force of blessing? And if we are the temple of the Spirit on earth, shouldn't we be that much of a force of a blessing? So does that answer the question? That's kind of that's a short rant on on that idea.
I knew what the kind of answer was, but
Okay.
I just wanted to set you up for that because I thought it was such an important, enriching thing.
He likes to
every time
throw.
here.
Likes to throw a low ball every once in a while.
There we go.
I
Right?
need a low ball every once in a while.
And the other thing is, I'm not too sure where we are on time. At the recording of this, we have just kind of come out of this little pandemic that was called COVID-19, and as a pastor, I'm trying to figure out how do I serve my congregation who seems to be just kind of coming out of the woodwork. There's just a different attitude. There's just people just trying to refigure and reconfigure their lives, coming out of like a traumatic experience, and as well people from the world and from the outside church. Yeah, I often think there's our church culture, then there's the Christian culture or the Christian community, other churches, and then there's this kind of chasm, and then there is just regular people like that are irrelevant to our faith and I'm just trying to figure, should I be doing anything different or should we be doing anything different? Is there any kind of solution as I'm taking a look and saying, well, how do I serve better coming out of a huge pandemic, a huge crisis? Is there any wisdom that we have? Is there anything that you've noticed? I'm kind of stuck here in Brandon. Well, not stuck here in Brandon, but I'm here in Brandon. I kind of have a limited view based on what is happening in Brandon. You have the opportunity to travel throughout the prairies anyways, through Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and probably other places as well. Is there anything that you are observing or anything that you can say to us as a church or anyone who's listening about is there different rules? I don't think we did well as a church through this pandemic. Nope. I think that there was a lot of arguing, a lot of petty issues. There's a lot of people who felt strongly, had their scriptures lined up as well with the way that they felt. And as the smoke has cleared, I don't know if we had represented ourselves well coming out of COVID. And I'm trying to figure that out. And I'm just trying to figure out even our church people themselves. Have you observed anything as you kind of traveled along?
I've observed lots. Let's see what we can boil this down into.
Yeah.
We've got this. So the pandemic seemed to be a bit of a magnifier or a multiplier. I don't think it necessarily changed things. It just sped things up, or it magnified struggles that we already had in the church world, right? It just really accelerated things. With that, on this end of the pandemic, we've got this weird, lots of our culture, and I think it's a ripe moment for the church to step into. But we've got a culture that is both desiring to be in relationship with people because that relationship has been in many ways lost over the last number of years, and there's a fearfulness about engaging with people still because it's been kind of ingrained into us to not really be around too many people. So there's a bit of a tension we need to hold, and I would agree the church at a whole probably didn't handle a lot of things well. We've missed some opportunities, but I think this moment especially in this idea of belonging, then believing. This is, I think, a pivotal moment. People want to belong. Now, we've got to be careful with where they're at. We don't want to alienate them by like forcing ourselves upon them, but really finding ways to engage in those smaller settings, engage with people where they're at, and say, you know what, wherever you're at, wherever you landed on anything with the pandemic that was polarizing on any end, I still love you. I still want to get to know you. And if you're willing to, I'd like to connect with you and learn more about you. I think we're in a pivotal moment. So I think big picture, that's the key. If we are the people of faith, we don't have a spirit of fear. If we can lovingly start stepping into these relationships at these moments, because I think if we don't, some other groups will. Even prior to the pandemic, what I found is a lot of people were replacing church with other events because the church wasn't doing a good job of being the relational driving machine it should be. My kids played football for years. I found that most of the football parents didn't need church because they had the football parents group. They basically replaced church with hanging out with their football friends without doing the service portion of it. But they found a group of people that cared for them unconditionally, that would journey with them, help them when they were down, walk through life with them. And it was outside of the church because you kind of mentioned at the beginning that this is a different language one of my friends uses, but you're not at the beginning earlier, that it's not the non-Christians are close to the church, it's that the church has been close to non-Christians, right? And if we stay in that mentality right now, I think we're going to miss one of the greatest opportunities the church has had in decades, because there are people who even though there's still some kind of an internal fear, they're still feeling uneasy about certain things, they want relationship. And this is a great opportunity this season for us who know Jesus to step into people's lives, start that journey with them where they're at, because a lot of people don't have the same support groups, the same structures, the same groups of events and people that they used to hang out with, because COVID has kind of broken that in some ways. So as they're coming out of it, before other groups kind of swoop in, I think this is a great opportunity for us to say, you know what, I'm going to step out and without pushing the boundaries of what my neighbor or my coworker feels uncomfortable with, I'm going to step out and I'm going to risk saying, hey, do you want to go out for a meal? Or hey, do you want to come to my house? Or if you feel uncomfortable with that, let's meet at the park and chat through, because most people are still struggling with fear, a lack of hope, not knowing about where things are at. So I think we have the answers, and not that we just want to enter those relationships to bop them on the head and give them the answers, but I think this is a right moment to really personally engage people. So there's probably a lot more, but that would be my initial thoughts.
That's great. That's that certainly is a challenge to me and any person who passionately loves Jesus and wants to share faith, the joy that they have. Now, I think we're coming to an end. Is there anything that we want to add?
I would just say for the Christians listening right now, for all of you listening, we've gone over a lot of stuff, but it really does boil down to build a relationship with people first. That's what we're talking about. They don't need to believe to belong. They belong to believe. And I just know that for myself, it was extremely, extremely important for me for that. So I just would say we just need all of us, all of the church, capital C, just needs to step up and just start listening first. And when I say listening, not talking back, actually just listen to people. I got through, we all had different battles during COVID and all these things, and working in churches and stuff like that as a more technical person, it was really trying because you had to figure out on your feet how to completely adapt to a new way to communicate to people. Yeah. And it was really, really, really hard. But if it wasn't for the friends and family around me that they didn't talk to me about work. It was, hey, Logan, how are you doing today? There was no intention of or even some of my old coworkers, they didn't be like, when's this video going to be done? Or because it was, how are you doing today? How's your life? If you ask somebody that, it immediately breaks down like so many of the barriers that like we build up. And I was having a conversation with Micah, who we had on last week, and he was talking to me, and he was like, Logan, I don't know how to like bring up Jesus to other people. And I was like, well, why do you have to bring up Jesus to other people? Why can't you just say, hey, how you doing? You know, and it like clicked in his head, and he was kind of like, oh yeah, like why don't we do that? And I just think, I don't know, we just need to get away from the 90s crusade sort of mentality. And like, those are great, they're awesome, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think that that's gonna work anymore.
The same notion has always been true. People don't care what you know until they first know that you care.
Yeah,
that's always been true. So so I don't know, maybe as you're listening in on the podcast here, it has kind of made you ask a few more questions, or maybe there is something that we haven't thought about, and you may need to ask a few more questions. So we do have an email that you can come to. It is,
so if you want to email us any questions, concerns, prayer requests, anything, forgiven@bethelbrandon.ca. I check it every day.
Yeah, and so we want to be part of the conversation. This isn't just something that we're saying just to kind of try and podcast or do something different, to put another badge on our chest, another star in our column. We genuinely care about you. We genuinely want to see life and joy come to anybody who's here. And you might be listening. I don't know. You'd be maybe a veteran here, or maybe you're just kind of at that stepping stone and trying to figure out faith. Well, help us to help you. And we want to genuinely see what we can do to make a difference in our community for you. And so I'm not too sure where you're at, but I'm glad that you were able to join us. And so may God bless you. Louis, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
So, and hopefully if we will hear from you as we continue on in our podcast. God bless, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Forgiven. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And more importantly, share this around with your friends and family so that you can help to empower and inspire them. If you want to get connected with us, you can leave a comment on your preferred platform. But the best way to do that is you can send us an email at forgiven@bethelbrandon.ca. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.